Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Got a new look going on, got a haircut. New year, new you. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. A lot to talk about. We have entities this week like the IMF and 10 countries simulating a cyber attack on the financial system. We have Elon Musk selling $10 billion worth of stocks. Remember, I did that video for you guys why Warren Buffett and Bill Gates were selling all their stocks, right? When the insiders sell, that's when you know things are not going to get well. And we even have a huge hack in the crypto space. Let's go ahead and get started. Market rebounds after 4 weeks of negative returns. We do have really good news this week is that the Supreme Delta Michael Jordan Omicron variant is not as serious as they thought it would be. And so I always joke around, right? But I don't want to get political. You know, obviously there's people on both sides, but the good news is that they're reporting that it's not as serious that they thought it was. It's very infectious, but it's not as deadly, supposedly. Also, there's inflation data that a lot of people are hopeful that supposedly we've reached its peak for inflation, even though the government data that has come out this week, which I'm going to give to you the exact numbers, is the worst in 40 years. Remember that the government data on inflation, if the number they're reporting is if those the worst in 40 years, then that means that it's a lot worse than that because obviously they manipulate the data, and I'll explain that to you guys as well. U.S. stocks overall higher for the week. The Dow went up over 4%, the S&P 500 close to 4%, and then the NASDAQ was up over 3.60%. We're gonna have a blackout, and you should prep for the worst news this week. We have a situation where there was 10 countries that were leaded? That's not a word in English now, is it? That Israel was leading 10 countries, including the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, where they had quote unquote war games to simulate a cyber attack on the financial system. Now, this week as well, I'm gonna scroll down here where I have my notes. There was a major outage in Amazon that disrupted businesses across the US. If anything, Amazon would probably be one of the most important of the big tech companies due to the fact that they have their own logistics now. So, you know, Facebook can go down, well, you know, you can't see how many likes you got on a photo. You know, if Google goes down, well, you know, you can search on DuckDuckGo or, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Or maybe not watch videos on YouTube for a while. But Amazon has some serious infrastructure. And I don't know if you guys remember, we had that huge Facebook Instagram outage. We had the pipeline hack. You guys remember where the hackers got into they had to shut down the oil pipeline where there was, you know, shortages of gas and oil. There was another outage. If I'm not mistaken, we've had 3 major outages so far across the board. And before we never had outages at all. Do you guys remember, like last 10, 15, 20 years, we never had these kind of problems before, but now all of a sudden we're having these problems, and now all of a sudden they're simulating a cyber attack? Smell something fishy? Other than that, there was a 330 store shutdown in northern England. The name of the store is called Spar, after they had a huge cyber attack. Speaking of cyber attacks, it's an international supermarket franchise that has over 13,000 stores in 48 countries, and the actual hack only affected the 330 stores in northern England. But again, right? I've been in this industry now for 21 years, learning how to trade, actually trading, training people to trade my money, and my mind has been trained to see patterns. And this is definitely a pattern that I'm seeing that is probably not going to end well. So, you know, crazy Marcello, prepping for the future. Go out, buy some canned food, maybe have a week, a few months would be good of food. You never know what can happen. If nothing happens and this is just crazy because the IMF is not preparing for this for no reason, then you'll have food to eat. Otherwise, you can just eat it later. So go out there and buy some food, some stored food. Other than that, in overseas market news, European markets mostly higher. Istanbul went up by 6.54%, which was the most positive of all the markets. In the LATAM and Canadian markets, mostly mixed for the week, with Canada rising 1.31%. And then in the Middle East, we have mixed markets, with Egypt being the biggest winner at 1.91% for the week. Far East, Philippines taking the crown at 1.91%. And then in Bitcoin and cryptos, Bitmart, which was a crypto exchange, they said that they were hacked and stole over $200 million in crypto. The company did say that they were going to reimburse the funds to the actual clients that were robbed. And if you guys remember, in August of this year, we also had a hack that was $600 million worth of tokens it was on a network called the Poly Network. Bank Colombia, the biggest bank in Colombia, which serves about 35% of the country, is going to officially start offering cryptos with a pilot in the government. So we have El Salvador making Bitcoin legal tender. We have Colombia now allowing well, not allowing, right? They want to get paid with the taxes, right? They want to be able to control people. That's really what it is. But it's good news. Obviously, we have the negative news with the hacks. We have some positive news. We have other major countries opening up the doors to Bitcoin. And remember the huge drop that we had last week in Bitcoin. As of now, we have about a 32% just off the high, the record high. For the week, Bitcoin was up 2.17%, just under 48,500. And in commodities, top exporter in the world, Saudi Arabia is raising prices for their crude for both Asia and the United States. Thanks to that and to other reasons as well, mainly the variant, which isn't as serious as we thought it was going to be. Oil reversed direction after 6 weeks of declining. For U.S. crude, it went up 8.16% to 71.67, and the international crude, which is called Brent, went up 7.54% to just over $75. Precious metals for the week, not a lot of movement. Gold is positive 0.01%. It sat at about $1,783, while silver went down 1.52% to 22.28. And in financial and banking news, the Chinese central bank, after market hours on Monday, decided that they're going to cut the reserve requirement ratio, or in other words, the amount of cash that banks have to have in reserve for the second time this year. That is not a good thing because it can destabilize the financial markets. Remember that China is the second largest economy in the world. Obviously still has the biggest population, soon to be overtaken by India. But if you guys don't know how the banking system works in the world, it's called a fractional reserve banking system. So basically, if I go and deposit $10,000, right, a bank, and these numbers are variable, only has to have something like 10%. So of the $10,000 that I deposit into the bank only has to hold as a reserve $1,000, right? So what do they do with the other 9,000? They go and buy, junk debt like they did in 2008, 2009. So they take your savings and they give it to really high risk assets. And then we have a financial meltdown like we had in 2008, 2009. Basically how it worked, right? Kidding. But they take the $9,000 and then they go and they borrow money, they go and invest it, things like that. And so what happens, for example, if we have a situation where a higher number of people go to the bank to take out their money, well, the bank doesn't have enough money to give out. And that's the problem with cutting the reserve ratio. This is what happened, for example, in the Depression in 1929. And just to kind of cover what we've had after the Depression in 2029, we had what's called the Glass-Steagall Act, which basically put a huge wall that said that the bank cannot take your savings and put it in risky assets like the stock market. So what happened recently? The Clinton administration removed that requirement. So now the banks could become too big to fail, for example. And then we had the 2008 and 2009 crisis. History repeats itself. So we don't have that restriction. We now have banks in the second largest economy in the world becoming more unstable due to the fact that they're not able to have enough reserves. Enough is kind of relative, right? But it's definitely not a good thing. Fresh vegetable prices in China went up by 30.6% in November from a year ago. Price of eggs went up by 20.1% since November from a year ago. And freshwater fish in China also went up 18% from a year ago. Now, I have the numbers here from the inflation data. There it is. U.S. Labor Department reported that the consumer prices went up by 6.8% in the year leading into November, meaning basically all of 2021 to November, at its highest rate in 40 years. At its highest rate since 1982. Now, remember last week and the week before, I gave you guys the list of how high things were going up, right? 40% for meat and 30% for pork and all this. So this number is manipulated, and obviously the government, this number is the extreme low ball, right? The actual number is much higher than it used to be because they even recalculated how they report the inflation number to make it seem like it's not so bad. So if you're getting a raise, for example, this year that's 1%, 2%, or 3%, and the inflation that the government is reporting or the increase in consumer prices, meaning everything you go out and buy went up by 6.8%, that means that your raise is less than 10, 20% what the actual prices of things are going up as. Not bueno. And this is actually going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Other than that, Japanese is now considering raising their economic growth forecast for 2022 after taking into account effects of the record $490 billion stimulus package. Put that drug in me. That's what the global economy is right now. Just give me that stimulus. Give me that stimulus. Unfortunately, we have a situation where we don't really have free markets anymore, right? Basically, after the 2008 crisis, which actually started in 1999 with the tech boom, the tech bubble that busted, we have a situation where the things aren't going to get better, or I should say things aren't going to stay the same unless, the government feeds us some of that stimulus. Now, the problem with that is they've done studies that when a government, a country has a 90% debt to GDP ratio, which basically means that they have the size of the economy. If they have 90% of debt compared to the size of the economy, every dollar that they inject into the economy, they get less than a dollar back. Japan, unfortunately, is at 200% debt to GDP, which means that the amount of their debt is 200% bigger than the size of their economy. Now, Japan is a special case due to the fact that the majority of their debt is internal, meaning that Japanese citizens give them debt, compared to, for example, the United States, which has a 130% debt to GDP ratio. Say that 3 times fast. So the United States has 130% or 130 times, not 130 times, but 130% more debt than the size of the economy. So due to the injections, all the stimulus, right? We just had another $1 trillion go out in the United States. Every time that they go and inject this money into the economy, one, it's mostly corruption, right? It's not like it actually goes to the economy. Remember, they have 1.2 trillion going to all kinds of things, and you and I got $600, right? So, and that's mainly the problem. So now we have a situation where they're continuing to just shove fuel in the fire when, bankruptcies and the economic cycle is a good thing, because a recession or a depression in some cases is when, excuse my French, is when all the shit gets out of the system, essentially, right? I couldn't think of a better way to say it, but all the bad stuff gets out of the system and then the system starts over again. Unfortunately, now we don't have a capitalistic system, right, where the free markets reign. We basically have a situation where the government decides who wins and who loses. If you take a look, for example, what happened in the pandemic, the big box stores like Walmart and Home Depot and all these big stores, they could stay open, but you and I had to close our business because pandemic, right? So, and this in a way, I believe, is what they actually want, due to the fact that they're much easier controlled. We are much easier controlled working for corporations, right? They don't want us to be independent and not have to rely on the government. Let's move back to the recap. U.S. Labor Department on Friday, I told you guys about the consumer prices. Political news, Olaf Scholz was sworn in as the new chancellor for Germany on Wednesday, ending the 16-year reign of Angela Merkel. She had the highest approval rating of a lot of political people around the world at 68%. I got to sneeze and I'm trying to hold it. New government vision for Germany includes plans to legalize cannabis, ease the naturalization, as well as ease the restrictions for dual citizenship. They want to phase out coal producing power by 2030, and they want to have more than 15 million electric cars on the road by 2030. Mandatory, the things that go in your arm, I don't want to say the word because we'll get censored, are also likely to be considered as the cases are soaring there in Germany. And if you guys remember, people have short memory spans. If you guys remember in the winter of 2020, which would be the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, Germany actually had an energy crisis because they couldn't pull power anywhere because they didn't have any wind for the energy that works with wind, and they didn't have any solar energy either because it was the winter and it was no sun. So they're putting the full speed ahead now when there may be a situation where they might not be able to have energy. You know, how are they going to heat their homes and stuff if there's not energy? Think about that. Economic news, investor confidence, which is an indicator called the Eurozone Sentix Index, fell in the Eurozone, obviously due to the situation with the Omicron. There's the fourth wave of the pandemic, the infection that starts with the C word. German industrial orders plummeted 6.9% month over month. Remember that Germany is the biggest economy in the Euro area, including the UK, even though the UK isn't part of the Eurozone anymore. And Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world. Obviously, this is pandemic related due to the scarcity of the microchips and other electronic components. They have a big automotive sector, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, Lamborghini. And so obviously that's a big situation because if we keep having these situations, right, Chinese with Evergrande, they went bankrupt, biggest real estate company in China. Now we're starting to have some red flags, right, which could definitely start to infect the rest of the economy around the world. Reported on Thursday, the initial jobless claims dropped 43,000 to 184,000 on the week ending December 4th. It's now at its lowest level since 1969. That sounds great, doesn't it? The jobless claims, people that were getting jobless benefits from not having a job, it's been at its lowest level since 1969. What they don't tell you is that there's a record number of people not looking for a job. So the actual number is manipulated, right? Because they don't count the people, they don't tell you the amount of people who aren't working because of the free money the government's giving out. And that's the real news. Other than that, in corporate news, Moderna slipped over 13% on Monday after they said that the Omicron variant might lead to a less severe form of the C word. The stock is down over 39% in the last 3 months, but up 154% in 2021. Kroger, which is the largest supermarket chain in the U.S. by revenue, saw shares fall by over 5% on Wednesday due to a somewhat strained balance sheet. Remember that they're the second largest U.S. general retailer and the seventh largest American-owned private employer in the United States. And Oracle, which is one of the biggest technology companies in the world, even though they're not as popular as companies like Facebook or Amazon or Microsoft, they saw their earnings jump the biggest one-day gain in 20 years. It went up over 15% after their quarter earnings beat, and they got a buyback boost. They're up over 14% in the past 3 months. And then this is trade news. This was actually pretty interesting. The Quebec maple syrup producers of the world, Quebec is a state on the right-hand side of Canada. They produce 33% of the world's maple syrup, and they're basically considered the OPEC of maple syrup, have decided to release over 22 million kilos. That's something like 40 or 50 million pounds of the reserve syrup that they had in their emergency supplies, and that about 50% of what they had in their reserve. I just thought that was fascinating because we're going to have a maple syrup crisis. Get your waffles ready, guys. In technology, China is developing a hypersonic plane, which can get to anywhere in the earth in 1 hour. So imagine, you know, I want that croissant from France. You're in New York or Los Angeles. Hop on a jet, right? 3 hours ahead of the airport, 1 hour flight, an hour to get out of the plane. You have your lunch, and then you go back. Basically, a full day of lunch. Other than that, major outage, I told you guys in the beginning, disrupted the businesses across the United States with Amazon. Again, get ready because I think something's going to happen this winter. In investment news, Toyota is building a $1.29 billion battery plant for electrified vehicles in North Carolina. It's going to be able to produce batteries for 200,000 vehicles when the production begins in 2025. Italy's antitrust authority, also in investing news, said on Thursday that they're going to fine Amazon 1.1 billion euros, which is roughly $1.3 billion, for allegedly abusing its dominant position in e-commerce logistics. And shares of Tesla finally went down under $1,000 on Monday after the company was reported to be investigated by the SEC for defective solar panels. Musk also has sold another 934,000 shares of Tesla, according to the SEC, and he sold a total of $9.85 billion in Tesla stock. One of the things that was also really interesting this week is that there was a report saying that the amount of insiders that are selling their stock is at a record high, which basically means always follow the smart money. If they're selling their money, their stocks, what does that tell you? We're probably not going to see record highs like we were seeing before if we see a record high again. It's possible, but we're definitely either at the top or close to the top. As of late Thursday, Fitch Ratings said that China's real estate behemoth Evergrande has not confirmed the payment of its latest debt obligation. It was a total of triggering a default. Remember last time there was fear that we were going to have this huge crisis because they didn't pay their debts. They have $300 billion in liabilities, $19 billion in offshore United States USD bonds, I should say, not United States. It's the most for any Chinese developer. And this company has more debt than a lot of the big tech companies combined, like Apple and Facebook, and they don't make anywhere near the amount of money of any of these guys. So this can be a really big problem if they don't solve it. Ford expects to triple its output of its all-electric Mustang Mach-E SUV to over 200,000 units by 2023 in North America and Europe. The stock is up over 9% on Friday, close to 70% in the last 3 months. And I don't know if you guys have seen that new Ford Explorer ST. Oof. Look it up in black. Oof. 400 horsepower. Oof. 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 Almost as scary as the Omicron variant. In international events, bad joke, yeah, not that good. New Zealand is announcing plans to prevent young people from buying cigarettes to be able to create a, quote, smoke-free generation in 2027. They're also going to decrease the amount of stores that can sell cigarettes from 8,000 today to 500 in 2024. And Russia is set to deliver another round of S-400 surface-to-air missiles to Turkey. They're saying, no, don't worry, guys. The missiles are defensive. They're not offensive, so don't worry about it, even though a lot of other people are extremely worried. For example, people like Greece and Cyprus. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is moving to tighten pandemic restrictions in an effort to prevent spike in hospitalizations and death this winter. Maybe he should take a page out of Florida's book that has 0 restrictions and 0 mask mandates and has some of the lowest caseloads and deaths in the United States compared to, for example, the thing in your arm mandated to walk into a restaurant in New York City, for example. Nicaragua's government is announcing that it's breaking off diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Instead, they're going to be embracing the communist mainland China, declaring there is only one China in the world. Now, a little bit more than 12 countries still have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Only a little bit more than 12 countries in the world. In addition to that, Russia has blocked off nearly 70% of the Sea of Azov, which is around the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula. Now, remember that this happened during the Obama administration, right? That they just went in and took Crimea from Ukraine. Literally just went in and took a piece of land from another country, no questions asked. Which leads me to believe that if something does happen with Taiwan, since Biden was part of the Obama administration, they're probably not going to do anything about that either. And in unusual facts this week, Elon Musk says that the low and rapidly declining birth rates around the world is one of the biggest risks to civilization, even bigger than climate change and equality. He's saying that the number of people are growing that don't want to have children can cause a much bigger problem than these other issues that we're facing. And while climate change is the primary driver of permafrost degradation in the Arctic Atlantic, in the Arctic Alaska, I should say. New analysis of the 70 years of data reveals that tundra fires are actually the ones that are accelerating the decline, which is not a good thing, because when the ice melts and it gets into the oceanic atmospheric river, let's say, right? I know I'm not saying that right, but basically the hot water from the equator is brought up, and that's part of the reason why, for example, Europe doesn't have an Arctic weather. So when a lot of this ice melts, not only do we have a rise in sea levels, but we also have changes in these sea and atmospheric regulations, let's say. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.